Okay, this is called The Rise of Progressivism, and we're going to be talking about this for the next week, involving several presidents ranging from Theodore Roosevelt all the way up to Woodrow Wilson right before World War II starts. Or World War I, not World War II. Okay, so the rise of progressivism, the era in American history from about 1890 to 1920, is known as the Progressive Era. Whoops, sorry about that. This was a collection of different ideas and activities about how to fix the problems within society. I keep doing that. Progressives often disagreed among themselves on solutions, but they did agree that government should take more of an active role in solving society's problems caused by urbanization and industrialization. Progressives believed that first government needed to be fixed and made more responsive to people before other problems could be addressed. They also believed that they could fix society's problems by applying scientific principles to society. You had a group called the Muckrakers, and these were journalists who investigated social conditions and political corruption. Their articles led to public debate on social and economic problems and put pressure on politicians to introduce reforms. The most famous muckraker is his name is Jacob Riis, who we've read about a little bit, read some of his work, focused on social problems in his book How the Other Half Lives, which we read an excerpt from. The book described poverty, disease, and crime in many of the immigrant neighborhoods in New York City. Okay, one of the things they wanted to do was to make government more efficient, the progressives did. So one of the things, the progressives often took opposing sides on these issues and how to solve them. Okay, one believed that problems in society would be solved if government was way more efficient than what it is. Okay, they felt that the government could become efficient by applying the principles of scientific management. Okay, and they thought that managing a city required experts, not elected politicians. They wanted to replace the existing system with a commission plan, where a board of commissioners or a city manager with expertise in city services would select and hire specialists to run these city departments. So in 1901, Galveston, Texas was the first to adopt this form of commission system. Many cities soon followed shortly after, and we still have a lot of cities that do this. Okay, democracy and progressivism. Many progressives wanted more democracy in society. Okay, you have the governor of Wisconsin, Robert La Follette, who criticized how political parties ran their conventions. So he pressured state legislatures to require each party to hold a direct primary. And when this takes place, a party election in which all party members vote for a candidate to run in the general election. You also have 3 new reforms that were introduced by progressives to force state legislatures to respond to voter concerns. The initiative was one of the things. It was allowed a group of citizens to introduce legislation and required that the legislature to vote on it. You also had the referendum that is introduced, allowed proposed legislation to be submitted to the voters for approval. And then you have the recall, which allows voters to demand a special election to remove an elected official from office. Okay, so to stop Senate corruption, progressives wanted the direct election of senators by all state voters. So in 1912, Congress passed the Direct Election Amendment. And in 1913, it was ratified, becoming the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. And this is why we vote for our state senators now. Okay, the suffrage movement also takes place during this time. And this is a movement for women's voting rights, which was known as the suffrage movement. And suffrage means you have a right to vote. Okay. So in July 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who we've discussed briefly, and Lucretia Mott organized the first women's rights convention. Many progressives joined the suffrage movement in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The suffrage, after the Civil War, Republicans in Congress introduced the 14th and 15th Amendments, which protected the voting rights of African Americans. The women's suffrage movement had wanted these amendments to apply to women as well, but the Republicans refused to have this in there. So the debate over the 14th and 15th Amendments split the suffrage movement into 2 groups and weakened its effectiveness. By 1900, only Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado had granted voting rights to women. So in 1890, the 2 groups united to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association, or the NASA. The head of the NASA's Congressional Committee, Alice Paul, who is a Quaker social worker, used protests to force President Wilson to take action on women's suffrage. After NASA became alarmed at Paul's activities, she left and started the National Woman's Party. This group picketed the White House and went on hunger strikes if arrested. In 1918, the House of Representatives then passed a women's suffrage amendment, and the amendment failed by 2 votes. In June 1919, the Senate finally passed the 19th Amendment, and on August 26, 1920, all the states ratified the amendment guaranteeing women the right to vote. Okay, social welfare progressivism. So social welfare progressives created charities to help the poor and disadvantaged and pushed for laws to help fix social problems. In 1900, over 1.7 million children under the age of 16 worked outside the home. The National Child Labor Committee worked to end child labor. Many adult workers labored in difficult and dangerous conditions as well. With the creation of building codes and workers' compensation laws, zoning laws, and health codes, the work environment was made safer for workers. Some progressives favored zoning laws and building codes to regulate how the land and buildings could be used. You also have the temperance movement, which called for the moderation or elimination of alcohol. Many progressives believed alcohol was the cause of many of society's problems. And so in 1874, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, was formed. At first, the temperance movement worked to reduce alcohol consumption, but later it pushed for prohibition, which meant laws that would ban the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcohol. Okay, progressives versus big business. Now, at this time, remember, you have a lot of monopolies, you have a lot of trusts, okay? So a group of progressives focused on regulating big business, but they disagreed on solutions. One side believed government should break up big companies to restore competition. Another group wanted the creation of government agencies to regulate big companies and prevent them from abusing their power. So socialism, now this is the idea that the government should own and operate industry for the community as a whole, was an idea shared by a small minority of these progressives. Eugene Debs, we've heard about him before, he led the American Socialist Party and was the party's candidate for president in the election of 1912. Most progressives and most Americans believed in the American system of free enterprise and did not want to change this. Okay, one of our better-known presidents for the progressive movement was Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, he kind of revives the power of the presidency. Before, you had those Gilded Age presidents of Garfield and Harrison and one other guy, I can't remember his name. That's how important they were. During his second term, Theodore Roosevelt's reform program was called the Square Deal. As a progressive and a social Darwinist, he felt the government should try to balance the needs of all the groups in American society. He believed that the U.S. Needed progressive reforms to remain an efficient society that can compete successfully with other nations. He also thought we should fight for control of the Burlington Railroad, which erupted on the New York Stock Exchange. E.H. Harriman of the Union Pacific Railroad and James J. Hill and J.P. Morgan of Great Northern Pacific Railroads argued over stock, which could have led to a recession. So the three men compromised by creating a new holding company called Northern Securities. Roosevelt felt these Northern Securities violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, and he ordered a lawsuit filed. So in 1904, the Supreme Court ruled that the Northern Securities had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. So the United Mine Workers, the UMW union, called a strike of the miners who dug coal, laid off about 150,000 workers from the mines of eastern Pennsylvania, and they demanded a pay increase, reduction of work hours, and recognition for their union. This strike went on for months and was threatening a coal shortage. So Roosevelt urged the union and owners to accept arbitration, which was a settlement imposed by an outside party. Union agreed, but the owners would not agree. The mine owners finally agreed after Roosevelt threatened to have the Army run the mines. In 1903, Congress created the Department of Commerce and Labor. Within the department was the Bureau of Corporations that had the authority to investigate corporations and issue reports on their activities. In 1906, under Roosevelt, the Hepburn Act was intended to strengthen the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, by giving it the power to set railroad rates. Over time, railroads realized they could work with the ICC to set rates and regulations that limited competition and prevent new competitors from entering the industry. Okay, Roosevelt on social welfare action. By 1905, consumer protection became a national issue. You have patents of medicines and food consumption became serious threats to Americans, forcing new legislation. Okay. In 1906, Upton Sinclair wrote the book called The Jungle, which described his observations of Chicago slaughterhouses, and it's quite disgusting if you ever read about it. As a result, new federal legislation was passed to counteract how things were going on in these slaughterhouses. The Meat Inspection Act required federal inspection of meat sold and set standards of cleanliness in meat packing plants. Then you have the Pure Food and Drug Act, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, or shipment of impure or falsely labeled food and drugs. Okay, conservation. President Theodore Roosevelt urged Americans to conserve natural resources. Okay, in 1902, Roosevelt supported the passage of the Newlands Reclamation Act, which authorized the use of federal funds from public land sales to pay for irrigation and land development projects. He also appointed Gifford Pinchot, or however you want to say that, to head the United States Forest Service to carefully manage the timber resources in the West. Pinchot and his department created regulations controlling lumbering on federal lands. Roosevelt's actions during his presidency caused Americans to increasingly look to the federal government to solve the nation's economic and social problem. During this time, the executive branch of the government greatly increases its power because of Roosevelt's actions. He also does a lot of stuff on the foreign landscape, but we're going to talk about that with our next unit. Okay, that concludes our discussion on the progressives and Theodore Roosevelt and his progressive actions that he took. So take the Edmodo quiz. I'll try to keep it a short quiz. It may be a little longer, maybe 4 or 5 questions, just because there's a little longer time on this, a little bit more information to go over and cover. Have it done by Monday, and I will see you then. Thank you, and have a great weekend.